Part 7 of Work of the Sisters During the Epidemic of Influenza, October 1918, by Francis Edward TOURSCHER. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 7. Relief Work in Private Homes, Sisters, IHM. St. Agatha's, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. On answering an urgent call in the parish, we found a sick mother and 3 sick babies lying around the parlor, crying for relief from their sufferings. They had been there for a week in this condition. On attempting to arrange a bedroom for them, we discovered upstairs alone the father in a dying condition, who told us that he had been an invalid for years. We arranged the little ones and their mother in fresh, clean beds, prepared nourishment for them, and soon they were on the way to recovery. The invalid father died. At the same time, we were attending several homes in the neighborhood. At one house, the mother, though not seriously ill, was utterly unable to attend to her little children, one a baby of 4 months. Each morning we stopped here, dressed the little ones, and prepared a substantial breakfast for them and nourishment for the mother. After visiting a few others, we returned to the little ones, who were eagerly looking for dinner. Again, towards evening, we gave these babies their supper, arranged the mother's room for the night, undressed the children, and put them to bed. In one of the other homes, on our round during that same week, there was a poor old lady without a soul to care for her. In another, a sick mother. In a third, a mother and 3 sick children. We did what we could for each, though we did not remain at any one place all day, as none of these were seriously ill. All gradually recovered. Another home in St. Agatha's gave evidence of the utmost destitution. Following the directions given, the sisters reached this place, but received no answer to their repeated knocking at the door, nor could they see the slightest sign of life around the place. Suspecting that all were victims of the influenza, the sisters entered the house, where they found the most abject poverty. The father, mother, and 3 little ones were all in bed, helpless. The mother had received the last sacraments the night before. She realized that recovery for her was ordinarily impossible, and her distress at the thought of leaving her little ones was pitiable. The sisters here did their best to improve conditions, but the task was difficult, as the father, their only breadwinner, had been ill for several weeks, and there was practically nothing in the house. With money provided for the purpose, however, the sisters procured sheets and necessary linens, good warm clothing, and the necessary food and nourishment. For 8 days we worked with these patients from early morning until late at night, but finally a change came, and they all gradually grew stronger. Then we visited them for only a few hours each day in order to wash them, arrange their beds, and leave them nourishing food. After another week, we had the happiness to see all on the sure road to recovery. In the same neighborhood, the sisters found a poor old grandmother and 2 little children in extreme danger of death, while in the same bed lay the dead body of a beautiful little boy of 5 years. After removing the dead body and preparing it for burial, the sisters devoted their attention to the sufferers, all of whom recovered. On our arrival at one of the homes reported by our pastor as requiring assistance, we found a mother and 3 little ones stricken with influenza, and 2 other little ones making the most of their unrestrained and unaccustomed liberty to do just as they pleased. At first we did not know what to do, but we set to work. After arranging the bedrooms and giving all possible relief and comfort to the sick mother, we prepared some light nourishment, which she sadly needed, and prepared for the doctor's visit. Then we washed and dressed the little ones who were not ill, and finally proceeded to prepare dinner for them and for the father, who was at work. Dinner over, we gave a much-needed cleaning to the rooms downstairs, in the intervals between attending to the sick. We had barely finished when it was time to prepare supper. Then we put the little ones to bed and arranged the sufferers for the night. Before returning to our convent, we prepared medicines and nourishment for the father to administer during the night. Though this poor, good man had been working laboriously all day, he watched his loved ones every night until the danger was past. This routine continued for 10 days, when the mother was able to manage for herself, and we were called to more needy patients. Among these were a very young woman who had no one to care for her. The first day we cleaned and arranged her room, in fact, the whole house, while we were waiting for the priest to come to administer the last sacraments. During the week following, we remained there all day, doing all the work of the house and cooking for her husband. She also recovered. Another sister writes, "The first house we entered was certainly a scene of distress. Lying on a couch were a mother and two small children. In another corner, on the floor, were two a little older. In the adjoining room the father was dying. On a bench in the same apartment lay a young man utterly incapable of the least movement. The only one to assist these poor victims was a little girl of 10 years. As quickly as possible we arranged the several poor beds upstairs, procured fresh linens and sheets for them from the convent, and made the sufferers as comfortable as could be expected. The mother seemed to derive her greatest consolation from the fact that the children and her husband were being cared for by the sisters. After about 2 weeks, all recovered, except the father, whom God called to his reward." Another family in the same parish presents a scene much the same. The mother and the 3 little children in one room, the mother's aunt, a very old lady, in another, all victims of the disease. The father of the little ones was doing his poor best to assist the sufferers, but his efforts, he said, seemed fruitless. The sisters here realized, as in many cases, that the first necessity was cleanliness and fresh air. These attended to, they administered the medicines as prescribed by the doctor, and then prepared nourishment. After 4 or 5 days of care and attention in this home, the patients were fairly convalescent, and the sisters directed their attention to the more needy. Passing by another house on their errands of mercy, the sisters noticed one dwelling apparently closed. They discovered, too, that the doors were locked. After inquiry, the sisters procured the key from the neighbors and went in. On the second floor lay a poor man, his wife, and child, all victims of the disease, helpless and starving, though they were far from poverty. For almost a week the sisters remained here from early morning until late at night. Then, after preparing nourishment and medicines, they locked the doors and confided the key to the neighbors until next morning. All these patients recovered. Annunciation. All the sisters but one here were victims of the influenza in serious form, so that one only served as district nurse to several Italian families in the parish. This one later went to the emergency hospital at Pottsville. 2 of the convalescents of this convent also later attended the children at the Home Bureau, 1702 Summer Street. St. Anthony's, Philadelphia. Many families, especially the very poor, were visited by the sisters from St. Anthony's Convent, but in nearly every case the patients were removed to emergency hospitals. One case, however, deserves mention. A woman in extreme poverty sent for aid to the convent. She even depended on the sisters for the barest necessities. There was no wash basin except the dishpan, which served all purposes. No food of any kind was in the house. For 2 days the sisters cared for this poor soul, who, though not dangerously ill, and therefore unable to obtain admission to a hospital, was absolutely helpless. On Saturday evening, when the sisters were leaving, the husband told them not to return on Sunday, as he would stay at home to care for his wife. Trusting him implicitly, they obeyed. As they were nearing the house early on Monday morning, the neighbors came crying and asked them to get the priest, as the man was dying. They sent for the priest, but when they entered the sick room, they found the man not dying, but drunk. The sisters' services were no longer required on this case. St. Clement's, Pascalville. A sister who had been sent to Pottsville for relief work gives her experience. In one little home near Pottsville, I discovered a young man dying who had neglected his religious duties for 10 years. Upon questioning, I discovered that he remembered no prayer but the Hail Mary, though he joyfully consented to receive the last sacraments. After receiving the sacraments, placing a lighted candle in his hand, I assisted him to make his thanksgiving. Very reverently he repeated each aspiration after me, and just as I was saying, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I give you my heart and soul and my life," he passed peacefully away. No one, not even the physician, had the least notion that death was imminent. Surely our mother takes care of her own. St. Edmund's, Philadelphia. My first experience in nursing was with two of our own sisters who had very severe attacks of influenza. They were recovering when a very urgent call for help came to the convent, and we hastened on our errand of mercy. We found 6 victims in this one home. A young man was making feeble efforts to attend to his sister and aunt. His father had just left a sick bed to care for a child of 2 years and a baby who was going to the children's hospital. The doctor ordered both brother and father to bed, as both were running a very high temperature. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon when we arrived at this home, so we phoned for permission to remain with the poor sufferers during the night. One of the patients was delirious, another a victim of double pneumonia. About midnight, the double pneumonia patient became very delirious and wanted to leave her bed. However, whenever Sister or myself approached her, she grew quiet. Even in her delirium, she realized the presence of the Sisters, and she kept speaking of St. Paul's and St. Thomas's, where she had attended school. The Sisters had been admonished by the doctor of the approaching crisis in the pneumonia case. About midnight, the Sister writes, we noted a change. We feared to alarm the other members of the family. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the delirium ceased. She grew calm, the temperature gradually lowered to normal, and in a few moments she fell into a sleep as peaceful as an infant's. For 4 nights and days following, we watched continually in this home an average of 19 hours each day, returning to our convent about 11 a.m. each morning, and resting there until 3 p.m., when we felt sufficiently refreshed to renew our vigil about 4 p.m. for the next night. About the 5th night, however, we decided to watch alternately 2 hours at a time, one resting while the other kept vigil. This rest consisted in sitting in the parlor, a little back from the open window, which afforded a moving panorama of doctors' machines, ambulances from St. Agnes Hospital, patrols, and funerals. One of the funerals was just a casket placed across the front of an automobile. One night a neighbor came pleading for us to go to a nearby house where the mother and 5 children had been stricken, and no one, not even near relatives, would go to them. Neither Sister nor I could go then, as our patients were all still in a serious condition, but we promised to have a Sister there from the convent at daybreak. This poor woman was overjoyed when the Sister came in the morning, and she told us later on that she had hesitated long before asking, as she was not of our faith. During all this period of anxiety, we were unable to leave our patients to assist at even a private Mass in our convent chapel, or to receive Holy Communion except on Sunday. However, we certainly made some good meditations during these long nights. We remained in this place 14 nights in all, but the labor and anxiety were rendered easier by the simple confidence, gratitude, and humble kindness of these good people. All finally recovered. St. Francis Xavier's, Philadelphia. The Sisters at St. Francis Xavier's suffered very severely from the ravages of the epidemic. Twice they endured the shock of death, which claimed 2 of the Sisters during the month of October, though one only, Sister Florentinus, was a victim of influenza. 10 others of the community were very ill with influenza. 5 of the Sisters, however, went out to the homes in the parish, nursed the sick, and assisted the afflicted when they could be spared by their sick associates in the convent. St. Gabriel's, Philadelphia. In St. Gabriel's Parish, the disease was very prevalent, so that the Sisters went from house to house, seeking out those who were in direst need, not remaining permanently unless there was no one to care for an urgent case, but offering assistance where it was most needed in the form of nourishment, cleaning and arranging the sick room, bathing the sufferers, and administering medicines as prescribed. The following is an example of a typical day. First, we found a lady who was very low. She was alone and could not get a doctor. We stopped a doctor whom we knew in the neighborhood, who could not come then, but called a little later. On our way to the next house, we met a woman who pleaded with us to go with her. On entering the home which she pointed out to us, we found a poor man whom one of us had taught as a boy in school. His was the saddest case we met. He was helpless with the disease. His two darling little children were playing on the floor, and he had just received word that his wife had died at St. Agnes Hospital. We remained with him till the body was brought home, assisting him all we could. Then we left him alone with his babies and the body of their dead mother. Each time we visited him, we found him more resigned to the loss of his girl wife, and most faithful in having the holy sacrifice of the Mass offered for her soul. These sisters next visited a home where the father and mother were both in bed, and their little girl, about 3 years old, playing outside, all unconscious of sorrow or care. They judged it necessary to have the mother removed to a hospital, but every application met with the same reply, "No room." Finally, they decided to remain with the sufferers all night, but about 9 o'clock the ambulance came for them, and both were removed to an emergency hospital. We kept the little girl at the convent until the mother recovered. Just outside the parish limits, the sisters one day came upon a very pathetic scene. 6 little children stood weeping outside a house, waiting to bid farewell to their dear father, whose body was being prepared for burial, though no one could be found to dig the grave. After offering some little consolation, the sisters passed on to another house. Returning a few hours later, they met the 6 children again, and the eldest, a girl of 12, between sobs explained that as soon as their father's body had been removed, the mother was found dead upstairs. The sisters had these children taken to the Catholic Home Bureau until relatives could be found to care for them. A very sad case was that of a whole family stricken, mother, 7 children, and no nurse but the father, who also was seriously ill. When the sisters entered this home, the mother had just died, leaving a baby 10 days old. The father, a picture of distress, cared not whether he lived or died. A kind neighbor, whose own girl was lying dead, relieved the sisters of the care of the infant. After a week, all were convalescing except the baby, which later died. Holy Name, Philadelphia. On Friday afternoon, October 10th, our pastor requested the services of 2 sisters for a family in the parish where there was great distress. We found the house on a very narrow back street, and the poor people were truly to be pitied and greatly in need of help. In the parlor were the dead bodies of the married son and his wife, who had died a few days previously. A daughter was dying in an adjoining room, alone, while her mother was seriously ill upstairs. The only attendant they had was the father, who was too sick to realize what he was doing. As both mother and daughter were in extreme danger, we sent for the priest to administer the last sacraments. In the interval, we made all possible preparations, bathed the patients, and attempted to give the rooms at least an appearance of respectability. Both mother and daughter received the sacraments, but there was no improvement in the condition of either. Late that night a woman from the neighborhood came and offered to take our places while we returned to the convent for a few hours' rest. When we returned to our patients early next morning, we found that the poor father, who had been acting as nurse until 4 p.m. the day before, had been anointed about midnight, and he was in a very precarious condition. We made arrangements for the burial of the son and his wife that day, ministering all the while to the 3 whom we thought to be dying. Next day my sister companion had contracted the disease, and as all the other sisters were out on cases, I felt it my duty to remain alone at this poor home. By this time the mother was sinking rapidly. The doctor gave her only a few hours to live. We continued to pray until her soul finally passed away. The father and daughter gradually recovered, and they have since shown evidence of better dispositions by regular attendance to their religious duties, though previous to the epidemic the neighbors did not even know that they were Catholic. Late one Saturday afternoon a call came from a poor colored family in the parish. The sisters found a mother and 2 boys seriously ill and starving. They said that they had had no nourishment of any sort for over a week. The sisters at first saw no other sign of life around the house, but soon the weak voice of another victim called them upstairs. The first requisite in this house was to prepare some liquid diet, for they could take no solid food. Then the house had to be thoroughly cleaned, the patients had to have their faces washed, the beds had to be arranged, and the rooms aired. The Sisters continued to care for these colored people for over a week, when they had improved sufficiently to help themselves. The next care confided to these Sisters was a doctor's family, and needless to say, the circumstances were quite different. Here, too, all were afflicted, even the housemaids, and no nurses could be had. After a few days, however, all were convalescent. In another home the mother was dying, the daughter seriously ill, and the father's body had been lying in the parlor for a week, awaiting burial. In many homes in this district the Sisters not only nursed the sick, but cooked, cleaned the house, and washed as well. In addition, they visited many homes to comfort those bereaved, and to assist the dying with prayers. Later, assistance was requested at the Catholic Home Bureau, and these same two Sisters helped there with the babies till school reopened. End of Part 7.